Hello, it's Mrs. Blanchard here on a snow day, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to do another at-home lecture. Oops, let's see if we can get my toolbar to go away. There we go. Another at-home lecture so we can get through the first part of the unit and get on to Jefferson's presidency. So we went through this in class the other day, but our themes here are the American expansion into the Trans-Appalachian West, the significance of Jefferson's presidency in political terms, economic terms, American Indian resistance, the transportation revolution, the creation of a national market economy, which is something we'll explore more in the next unit, along with the beginnings of industrialization in the next unit. And although it's going on during this period, we'll study this in two more units. The paradoxical growth of slavery, mainly due to the C word, which we'll talk about in a moment, but also in the North, the growth of free black communities. So, to understand Jefferson's presidency, the significance of his presidency, but also the significance of the early 19th century, you have to understand the changes that are happening economically, socially, politically at the turn of the 19th century. So today, to start that off, we're going to look at some demographic changes. So here's a map we looked at of the United States in 1800. During that time period, the U.S. population had major growth, about 2 million people. In the 1900 census, the U.S. population was 5.3 million, of which about 900,000 were slaves. 10 years later, in the next federal census, the population has risen, those 2 million people, to 7.2 million, of which now close to 1.2 million of whom are slaves. So notice that not only does the total population grow, but so does the slave population at a pretty consistent rate. Where are all these people going? That brings us to the Trans-Appalachian migration. More and more states west of the Appalachians up to the Mississippi are being made states after the 1790s. We had seen the addition of Kentucky and Tennessee in the two federal election maps that we looked at last semester. You also see Ohio being added in 1803 after the Treaty of Grenville and the Non-Intercourse Acts with the Native Americans that opened up a lot of settlement in that region to white settlers. Cities like Cincinnati, after fallen timbers, grow very quickly. Cincinnati is well situated on the Ohio River, which then opens it up to not only the Ohio River Valley, but also the Mississippi River Valley. However, a lot of Western farmers still are concerned about the fact that the port of New Orleans is still controlled, at least temporarily, by Spain. In 1802, Spain's going to cede it to France in a secret treaty when Napoleon becomes Emperor of France, and then we will purchase it in 1803 from the French. What is helping us move west? First, things like the National Road that's begun in 1811, so a little after Jefferson's presidency, but before the War of 1812, is going to help our movement into the west and is slowly going to be added on to throughout the next several presidents' terms. The one thing that John Quincy Adams is really able to achieve during his presidency is the extension of the National Road, I believe, from Wheeling to Columbus. What are early settlers using to move west? These Conestoga wagons, covered wagons in which they would pile all their stuff in and lead them on things like the National Road or other smaller roads out to the west. Although not important in terms of internal migration, the Yankee clipper ships are important in American economic history. The name implies that they are invented here in the United States. I love this picture because you see the American flag there hanging off the back. Yankee clipper ships are more narrow, meaning they can go faster at sea. As a result, they're going to cut down the time it takes to get from North America to Europe by about 2 weeks, which is pretty significant. And this is going to lead, at least temporarily in the early 1800s, to a shipping boom in the United States, especially in New England, where you see a lot of shipbuilding and large merchant cities opening up like New York, Boston, Philadelphia. This is going to lead to the dominance of New England shipping in really the world economy. Robert Fulton, one of our people we'll be meeting during the meet and greet, at least patents the steamboat. He had built on earlier inventions, and here pictured is the Clermont. So when you look at maps of the United States, the steamboat is important because if you think back to our map of the Mississippi and Ohio River, it was one thing to go downriver, but the steamboat is now going to allow you to go upriver. And we'll take a look more at that in future chapters. You also have the opening of the Erie Canal by DeWitt Clinton in the 1820s. The Erie Canal opens up a lot of New York State to transportation, opening up that Hudson River Valley here on the right to Lake Erie and hence the Ohio River Valley there on the left, because you can sail through Lake Erie and reach other smaller canals and tributaries that can open you up to the Ohio River Valley. And this is going to help connect farmers in the Hudson River Valley to farmers in the rest of New York as well as northern Ohio, Pennsylvania, and the rest of the United States. Next is Eli Whitney. During the American Revolution, he had been granted a contract to produce rifles for the American Army. He never came through on that contract, but in trying to, he developed the idea of interchangeable parts, mainly for these rifles that he was contracted to produce for the Army. Interchangeable parts is not only going to expedite American manufacturing, but it's also going to lead to Eli Whitney's other invention, and I use that somewhat sarcastically, that of the cotton gin. The cotton gin was actually invented by a slave out of necessity. In the 1790s, you also had the use of a new hybrid crop of cotton called short staple cotton, meaning the inside was shorter rather than the longer seeds that were prevalent before. The shorter seeds made it easier to extract them and grow them. So with a combination of this new type of cotton and the cotton gin, it's going to turn the South into a cotton growing region by the 19th century. So you'll see several dates for the cotton gin: 1791, 1793, and 1794. It undergoes a refining process and then is finally patented in 1794. But really, if you think, once you get after the American Revolution and you get to the beginning of America, we can now start saying the C word of cotton. And by the 19th century, cotton is going to be the king in American economy. So the economy, though, despite these manufacturing things we've just kind of discussed, the interchangeable parts of Eli Whitney, the cotton gin, Erie Canal, and the steamboat, America is still predominantly an agricultural nation, with 84% of Americans being involved directly in agriculture. The southern economy is dominated by rice, especially along the coast, and tobacco cultivation, but more and more after the 1790s, it's going to be replaced and supplanted by cotton, though a lot of tobacco cultivation will still take place in the upper South and mainly Virginia and Kentucky. Cotton is going to become the dominant southern crop of the 19th century, eventually becoming the king crop before the Civil War. And the cotton production becomes so entrenched in the South that they feel it's essential to their way of life. And along with cotton are going to go slaves, and cotton and the South's feelings that they need slaves for their economic survival. This cotton is going to be a little paradoxical because it's going to be the crop on which the northern profits of the early industrialization is going to be built. The northern economy is more diverse. There's still more small-scale farming. There'll be cultivation of livestock, grains, and smaller farms. Boston, New York, and Philadelphia rely on the international trade expedited, as we saw earlier, by the Yankee clipper ships, but otherwise plays a pretty marginal role in America's political life, as only 5% of Americans live in these large cities. By 1800, industrialization is just beginning, and this is the topic of our next unit, so I don't want to go too in-depth in it. But Samuel Slater and his mill will open up in Massachusetts, taking this new raw material that's being produced in the South of cotton and starting cotton spinning factories. And later factories will follow suit into factories that actually weave this into fabrics. For the most part, textiles are still homemade during this time period in something called the putting out or cottage industry system, but it is becoming more and more the birth of early manufacturing in the United States and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So, a quick review question: which of the following transportation developments opened the West to settlement and trade between 1790 and 1830? Take a look at this and we will answer this question in class later.